I'm Daniel. I'm 38 years old, and I discovered my family was planning to steal over $300,000 from me to save my brother from prison. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on them in the most spectacular way possible, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's good to know I'm not alone in this. For 12 years, not a single Sunday passed that I didn't have dinner at my parents' house. 12 years. Through brutal flu seasons, last-minute work emergencies, and even a nasty breakup that left me wanting to do nothing but stare at a blank wall. It didn't matter. Sunday dinner was a sacred tradition, and I was its most faithful disciple. My mother, Linda, had a nickname for me, Old Reliable. It was meant as a compliment, I think. I was the one who remembered birthdays, who brought the dessert without being asked, who showed up always. That particular Sunday was no different. The air was crisp with the first hint of autumn, and the lasagna in the passenger seat filled my car with the comforting smell of garlic and oregano. It was my dad, Frank's, favorite, made from my grandmother's recipe. I'd spent most of the afternoon perfecting it. I pulled into the familiar driveway, the gravel crunching under my tires, and killed the engine. I could already hear the low hum of conversation and laughter from inside. Balancing the heavy ceramic dish, I walked up the porch steps, the same ones I'd probably run up and down a million times as a kid. My hand was just reaching for the doorknob when I froze. It was my father's voice, low and conspiratorial, slicing through the cheerful noise. "Diane won't be a problem," he said, and the name took me a second to process. It was their old name for me before I transitioned, a name they rarely used unless they were being dismissive. It was a small sting, but what came next was a dagger. "He never says no to family." My brother, Greg, mumbled something I couldn't catch. Then his voice became clearer, laced with a panic I'd never heard before. "It's 300,000, Dad. They said if I can't produce it, they're launching a full investigation. Not just taxes. Everything." Silence. Then my father's voice, chillingly calm. "We'll get it. Daniel got that big promotion. He's probably making, what, 150 now? More." I heard my mother sigh. "Frank, that's his whole life savings." "What's the alternative, Linda?" Dad shot back. "We'll say it's for the roof. A new furnace. Then later medical bills. We'll spread it out. He'll give it. He always gives." My own brother's voice sealed my fate. "Yeah," Greg said, a little too eagerly. "He's a soft touch. Always has been." The lasagna pan suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My heart was hammering against my ribs, each beat a sickening thud of realization. They weren't just asking for help. They were plotting. They had a script. They were going to use my love, my loyalty, my entire history of being old reliable as a weapon against me. Without making a sound, I backed away from the door. I placed the lasagna on the porch swing, a silent, useless offering. Then I turned, walked back to my car, and drove away. The world as I knew it shattered into a million pieces. The drive home was a blur. I don't remember the turns I took or the traffic lights I stopped at. My mind was a chaotic slideshow of the past, and every memory was now tainted, recontextualized by the conversation I just overheard. Every act of generosity I'd ever performed for my family now felt like an act of foolishness. My first big promotion. I was 26, fresh-faced, and so proud I could barely contain it. The bonus was $40,000, more money than I had ever seen in my life. I remember calling my parents, my voice buzzing with excitement. I was going to put a down payment on a small condo. But then, a week later, Greg called. His catering business, his latest sure thing, had gone under. He was devastated, talking about bankruptcy, about losing everything. He needed 40 grand to pay off his suppliers just to break even. "I'll pay you back, Danny, I swear," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. "Every penny. You're saving my life." I didn't even hesitate. The condo could wait. This was my brother. I transferred the entire bonus to his account the next day. He never mentioned it again. I never asked. You don't ask family for money back, right? You just give. The slideshow kept playing. 2 years after that, Greg was on his feet again, but he'd totaled his car. He needed a reliable vehicle for his new job. I had just finished paying off my own sensible sedan. I co-signed a loan for him on a truck that was, in my opinion, far too expensive. When he missed 3 payments in a row and the bank started calling me, I covered them without a word to him, just to protect my own credit score. I told myself he was just forgetful. Then there were my parents' anniversaries. Their 40th. They'd always dreamed of a cruise to Alaska. Dad had been laid off a few years prior and his pride was a fragile thing. He wouldn't hear of taking a handout, so I framed it as a gift. From both of us. I booked the whole thing, the flights, the balcony suite, the excursions. It cost me nearly $20,000, my entire emergency fund at the time. My mother cried when I gave them the tickets. "You're such a good son, Daniel," she'd whispered, hugging me tight. Even the little things started to stack up, forming a mountain of evidence against them. The weekly dinners where I always brought the most expensive dish. The holidays where I was expected to cover the cost of the main course. The time I paid to have their furnace replaced because, as my dad put it, things are tight right now. Each memory was a fresh cut, each one a testament to my own blindness. They didn't see a loving son, a generous brother. They saw a resource, an emergency fund with a heartbeat, a safety net they felt entitled to deploy whenever their own poor decisions came back to bite them. Greg's words echoed in my head. He's a soft touch, always has been. He was right, I had been. But as I pulled into the parking garage of my own apartment building, the one I paid for with my own hard work, a cold, hard resolve began to form in the pit of my stomach. The soft touch was gone. The man who had driven away from his parents' house was not the same one who was now parking his car. That man died on their porch, and I wasn't about to let his ghost pay for his brother's crimes. The silence in my apartment was deafening. It was a space I'd curated to be my sanctuary, filled with books and art and comfortable furniture. Tonight it felt like a cage. My hands were shaking as I set my keys on the counter. I paced back and forth, from the kitchen to the living room window, the city lights below a meaningless smear. My first instinct was to call them, to scream, to demand an explanation. But what would that accomplish? They would deny it. They would twist it. My mother would cry, my father would get defensive, and Greg would play the victim. They'd turn it around on me, make me feel guilty for eavesdropping, for misinterpreting, for being selfish. The old playbook. And the old me would have folded. But the old me was gone. I needed to talk to someone who wasn't tangled in the web of my family's dynamics. Someone who would see the situation for what it was. There was only one person. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over the name before I pressed it. "Mark," I said when he answered, my voice cracking on his name. "Danny? What's wrong? You sound awful." Mark and I had been friends since college. He was the brother I'd chosen, not the one I was born with. He was a straight shooter, a no-nonsense accountant who saw the world in black and white, debits and credits. I sank onto my sofa, the leather cool against my skin, and the story came pouring out. I told him everything. The Sunday dinners, the lasagna, the voices through the door. I told him about the $40,000 bonus, the co-signed loan, the Alaskan cruise. With every word I spoke, the absurdity of my own naivete became more and more apparent. I wasn't just telling him. I was finally telling myself the unvarnished truth. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. For a horrifying second, I thought he was going to tell me I was overreacting, that it was just family. "Okay," he finally said, his voice level and serious. "First, what they are doing is not okay. It's monstrous. You are the victim here 100%. Do not let them gaslight you into thinking otherwise." The relief that washed over me was so intense. My eyes welled up. Just hearing someone else validate my feelings felt like a lifeline. "Second," he continued, "this isn't about a family squabble anymore. 300 grand for a tax issue? That's not an oops, I forgot to file problem. That's a I'm going to prison problem. That sounds a lot like tax fraud, Daniel. You need to stay as far away from that as possible. If you give him money, you could be implicated." The word prison hung in the air between us. It was real. This wasn't just about my brother being irresponsible. It was about him being a criminal, and they were going to make me his unwitting accomplice. What do I do, Mark? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. You protect yourself, he said, his tone firm. Tonight. Right now. You have a financial advisor, right? Rick? Yeah. Call him. First thing in the morning. Tell him you need to move your assets. All of them. New bank, new accounts, the works. Change every password you have. If your mother is on any of your accounts as a beneficiary or an emergency contact, take her off. You need to build a financial firewall, and you need to build it yesterday. He was right. Action. That's what I needed. Not sorrow, not anger. Action. They're going to lose their minds, I said, thinking of the inevitable storm. Let them, Mark said. It's their storm, not yours. You just need to make sure you're out of the rain when it hits. You're a good man, Danny. You've been a better son and brother than they deserved. It's time to be good to yourself. We talked for another hour, Mark patiently walking me through a checklist of what I needed to do. By the time we hung up, the shaking in my hands had stopped. The panic in my chest had been replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. My family had drawn a battle line, and I was about to show them they had picked a fight with the wrong person. Sleep was an impossibility. My mind was a racetrack, thoughts firing off at a dizzying speed. After hanging up with Mark, I walked over to my home office, the small room that had always been my place of focus, and flicked on the desk lamp. The warm pool of light illuminated a stack of financial statements I'd been meaning to organize. Seemed like a sign. For the rest of the night, I became a man on a mission. I didn't allow myself to feel the pain, the betrayal. I channeled it all into cold, hard logistics. I pulled up every financial account I had, my checking, my high-yield savings, my 401k, my investment portfolio. I laid them all out in a spreadsheet, every dollar accounted for. Seeing the numbers, the result of years of hard work, long hours and careful planning, solidified my resolve. This was my future, mine, and I would not let them burn it down to keep themselves warm. I drafted an email to Rick, my financial advisor, marking it as urgent. The subject line was simple: urgent, secure asset transfer. In the body, I laid it out clearly. I needed to establish new accounts at a completely different financial institution, one my family had no history with. I wanted all funds transferred immediately. I needed to review my retirement account beneficiaries and change my passwords across the board. I didn't give him the family drama, just the instructions. It was cleaner that way. As the first gray light of dawn started to bleed through my window, I moved on to the smaller, more personal things. I logged into my cell phone account and changed the password. I checked my credit cards to make sure there were no authorized users I'd forgotten about. I even went through my social media, tightening my privacy settings. It felt like I was battening down the hatches before a hurricane. Around 6 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mom. Didn't see you last night. Everything okay, sweetie? The casual, loving tone of it, knowing what I now knew, made my stomach turn. I stared at the message, the word sweetie, feeling like a drop of poison. This was the opening salvo of their plan, the manufactured concern. I typed out a reply, my thumbs feeling clumsy. Got held up with a work emergency. An audit. Talk later. It was a lie, but it was a necessary one. I needed time. I needed to get my defenses in place before the real assault began. I knew the audit excuse would buy me a day or two, as my family, particularly my father, held a strange reverence for any kind of official-sounding work problem. I finally pushed away from my desk as the sun properly rose, flooding my apartment with morning light. I hadn't slept a wink. My eyes were gritty, and my body ached with a strange combination of exhaustion and adrenaline. I looked at the man in the reflection of the dark computer screen. He looked tired, older than he had 24 hours ago. But his eyes were different. The softness was gone. In its place was a steely glint I hadn't seen there before. I made a pot of coffee, the strongest I could stand. As I took the first sip, my phone rang. It was Rick. Got your email, Daniel, he said, his voice all business. That's quite a set of instructions for a Monday morning. Everything all right? Everything's fine, Rick. I lied smoothly. Just doing some long overdue financial housekeeping. How quickly can we make this happen? Give me till noon, he said. By lunchtime, you'll be a ghost. Perfect, I said, a grim smile touching my lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Let's get to work. The war had begun. That Monday was one of the most surreal days of my life. I went to work, sat in meetings, responded to emails, all while a financial war was being waged on my behalf. My phone stayed on silent in my pocket, but I could feel it vibrating, a constant, nagging tremor against my leg. At 11:45 a.m., I got an email from Rick. The subject line was, Phase 1 complete. I ducked into an empty conference room to read it. New accounts opened. Transfer requests initiated. Beneficiaries updated. Passwords for my old online portals had been changed, locking out anyone but me. A wave of profound relief washed over me. The fortress walls were up. The transfer itself would take 24 to 48 hours to fully clear, but the process was irreversible. The die was cast. As if on cue, my phone began to buzz incessantly. I pulled it out. 3 missed calls from Mom, 2 from Dad, 5 from Greg. Then the text started. Mom, honey, just wanted to check in. Call me when you get a chance. Greg, need to talk to you. Urgent. Dad, Daniel, call me. I ignored them all. I watched the messages pile up, each one a little more frantic than the last. They must have tried to access something. Or maybe it was just their timeline kicking in, the part of the plan where they would begin to gently probe about my finances for their leaky roof. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of hyperfocus, burying myself in my work. It was my armor. As long as I was focused on spreadsheets and market projections, I didn't have to think about my family imploding. But the world outside my work bubble was churning. When I finally left the office at 6, I checked my phone again. The number of missed calls had tripled. The texts had escalated from concerned to demanding. Greg, where are you? I've been calling all day. Greg, this isn't funny, man. Call me back. Greg, I'm in serious trouble here. Pick up the phone. Mom, Daniel, I'm getting worried. Please just let us know you're safe. Mom, your father is upset. You know how he gets. Please call. Dad, this is unacceptable. Whatever is going on, you have a responsibility to this family. Call me. Now. His last text made me laugh. A short, bitter sound. Responsibility. He wanted to talk about responsibility after plotting to fleece his own son. The hypocrisy was staggering. I drove home, the constant buzzing of my phone a soundtrack to my newfound resolve. I made a simple dinner and ate it in front of the TV, not really tasting it. Every fiber of my being was on high alert, waiting for the next move. Came around 8 p.m. A frantic call from Greg. For some reason, I decided to answer this one. I wanted to hear it. I hit the speakerphone button and set the phone on the coffee table. Finally, he yelled, his voice tight with panic. What the hell is wrong with you? I've been trying to reach you all day. I've been busy, I said, my voice eerily calm. Busy? I'm about to lose everything, and you've been busy. That sounds like a personal problem, Greg. The silence on his end was thick with disbelief. This was not the script he was used to. I was supposed to be the concerned, caring little brother, ready to swoop in and solve his problems. What did you just say to me? He sputtered. I said, I enunciated clearly, that your problems are your own. Don't call me again. Before he could respond, I hung up. My heart was pounding, but I felt a surge of power. It was the first time in my entire life I had ever set a real boundary with my brother. A minute later, my phone buzzed with a text from him. You'll regret this. I didn't bother to reply. I just blocked his number. Then my mom's. Then my dad's. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The firewall wasn't just financial anymore. It was total. I knew blocking their numbers wouldn't be the end of it. It was a temporary solution, a digital dam against a flood of desperation. The floodwaters breached the dam the very next evening. I was walking to my car in the office parking garage, a cavernous, poorly lit concrete structure. It had been a long day, and I was exhausted. As I rounded a thick support pillar, a figure stepped out of the shadows, blocking my path. It was Greg. My blood ran cold. My first thought was that he was going to get physical. He was bigger than me, and his face was a twisted mask of rage and desperation. "You think you can just ignore me?" he spat, jabbing a finger in my direction. "You block my number? After everything this family has done for you." I stopped a few feet away from him, clutching my briefcase like a shield. "What has this family done for me, Greg, besides view me as a walking ATM?" He blinked, taken aback by the directness of my accusation. "What are you talking about? We need your help. I'm in trouble." "I know," I said, my voice low and steady. "I heard you, all of you, on Sunday night." I was on the porch. The color drained from his face. The aggressive posture slumped as the realization hit him. He knew exactly what I was talking about. His eyes darted around the empty garage as if looking for an escape. You weren't there," he stammered, but there was no conviction in his voice. I said. "I heard the whole plan. The leaky roof, the medical bills, the plan to bleed me dry to the tune of $300,000 to pay for your... What was it? A tax problem?" He flinched. He looked cornered, like a rat trapped in a maze, and like a cornered rat he lashed out. "So what if you did?" he sneered, trying to regain some semblance of control. "It's what family does. We help each other. You're sitting on a pile of cash from that fancy promotion of yours, while your own brother is about to go down." "Go down for what, exactly?" I pressed, taking a step forward. My fear was gone, replaced by a cold, investigative curiosity. "Mark, my friend, the accountant," he said, $300,000 sounds like more than just a simple tax mistake. It sounds like fraud. "So tell me, Greg, what did you really do?" This was twist number one. He broke. The pressure was too much. "It's not just the taxes," he blurted out, his voice cracking. I moved some money around for some people. I borrowed from the company. They said if I didn't pay it all back, they're not just going to the IRS, they're going to the cops. There are other things, other problems." He had just confessed to embezzlement and likely money laundering. It was so much worse than I could have possibly imagined. And they wanted me to clean up that mess. They wanted me to use my hard-earned, legitimate money to pay off criminals and cover up felonies. A wave of nausea hit me. I looked at my brother, this man I had once admired, and felt nothing but a profound sense of pity and disgust. "You're on your own," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "You dug this hole. You can lie in it." I started to walk around him, toward my car. "You were going to let me go to prison over money?" he yelled at my back, his voice filled with a pathetic, self-serving disbelief. I stopped and looked back over my shoulder. "No, Greg," I said, the words as sharp and cold as ice. "You're going to prison because you committed crimes. The old me, the one you all counted on, thought that love meant sacrifice. The old me died on your porch Sunday night. You should beg someone else for help. I'm done." I got in my car, locked the doors, and drove away, leaving him standing alone in the deepening gloom of the parking garage. The confrontation with Greg was a turning point. It solidified my resolve and extinguished any lingering embers of doubt. But I underestimated my family's capacity for manipulation. If the angry, cornered brother approach didn't work, it was time to deploy their ultimate weapon, my mother. 2 days later, my assistant, Sarah, buzzed my office intercom. "Daniel, your mother is here to see you." My heart sank. I had specifically told her to screen all my calls and not to let any unexpected visitors through. "Sarah, I'm in the middle of something," I started. "I know," she whispered, her voice apologetic. She started crying. She said it was an emergency. I didn't know what to do. Of course, the public waterworks. A classic move. "It's okay, Sarah. Send her in." My mother walked into my office, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she was clutching a tissue in her hand. It was a masterclass performance. She closed the door softly behind her and stood there, looking at me with an expression of deep, maternal sorrow. "Daniel," she began, her voice trembling, "why are you doing this to us? To your brother?" I remained seated behind my large mahogany desk, creating a physical and emotional barrier between us. "Doing what, Mom?" "Protecting myself." "Protecting yourself?" She let out a sound that was half sob, half scoff. "He's your brother. Your only brother. He made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But he's family. You can't just turn your back on him." "He didn't make a mistake," I said, keeping my voice level. "He committed crimes. Plural. And you, Dad, and him conspired to make me pay for them. That's not a mistake, Mom. That's a betrayal." She walked closer, perching on the edge of one of the chairs in front of my desk. "We were desperate. We didn't know what else to do. Your father is a proud man. It would kill him to see Greg go to that place. So your solution was to ruin my life instead? To drain my savings, compromise my financial future, and make me an accessory to his crimes. It wouldn't have been like that," she insisted, the tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "We would have paid you back. Someday." "There is no someday, Mom. There's no amount of money that can fix this. Don't you understand what you've done? You didn't just try to take my money. You destroyed my trust. You destroyed my image of this family. You destroyed every good memory I ever had." My voice was rising, filled with a pain so raw it surprised even me. I took a deep breath, reining it back in. "He's your son," she whispered, playing her final card. "My son. And he's going to prison if you don't help." I looked at her, this woman who had raised me, and I felt a profound emptiness. The love was still there, a dull, aching phantom limb, but the respect, the foundation of any healthy relationship, was gone. It had been eroded over years of taking, and finally washed away in a single, overheard conversation. I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "No, Mom," I said, my voice cold and final. "He's your son. You and Dad enabled him his entire life. You taught him that there were no consequences for his actions because Old Reliable would always be there to bail him out. Well, the bank is closed. The account is empty. You help him." I pressed the button on my intercom. "Sarah, could you please show my mother out?" The look on her face was one of utter shock. She had come here expecting her tears to work their usual magic. She had expected me to crumble. But she wasn't dealing with that Daniel anymore. As Sarah gently escorted her from my office, my mother looked back at me one last time. Her eyes filled not with sorrow, but with a dawning, resentful anger. The mask had slipped, and in that moment, I knew I had made the right decision. The weeks that followed were strangely quiet. A tense, unnerving silence. I knew it was the calm before an even bigger storm. My family, having failed with aggression and emotional manipulation, was regrouping. I used the time to my advantage, meeting with my boss and mentor, Mr. Harrison. I told him a sanitized version of events, a serious family issue requiring me to create distance. He was surprisingly understanding. "I've been meaning to talk to you, Daniel," he said, steepling his fingers. "We're expanding our London office. We need a strong director to lead the team there. A fresh start might be what you need. Think about it. An ocean between me and this mess." The offer was a lifeline. The next attack came not via a phone call or an ambush, but via a man in a cheap suit who served me with papers as I was leaving a coffee shop. I was being sued. By my own parents. I sat in my car, my hands trembling slightly as I read the legal document. The allegations were ludicrous. They claimed that every dollar I had ever given them or Greg was not a gift, but a loan, for which they had a verbal agreement to repay. They were suing me for the return of their loans to me, which was a bizarrely inverted claim, plus damages for emotional distress and financial instability caused by my sudden and callous abandonment. They were trying to rewrite history to legally enforce the very obligation they had failed to create through manipulation. My first call was to Ms. Chun, a notoriously sharp lawyer Mark had recommended. My second call, however, was an incoming one from a number I didn't recognize, but it had my hometown's area code. I answered cautiously. "Danny, honey, it's your Aunt Carol. My mother's younger sister, the cool aunt." I'd always had a soft spot for her. Her voice was syrupy sweet. "I just heard about this awful lawsuit. Your parents are beside themselves." I told them it was a terrible idea, but they're just so hurt. "Hurt?" I said, my voice flat. "Yes, honey. They feel like you've completely cut them out. Look, I know Greg messed up, but can't you just talk to them? Maybe lend them a smaller amount as a gesture of goodwill? Just to make this all go away." And there it was. Twist number 2. Aunt Carol wasn't a peacemaker. She was a spy, an operative sent in to test my defenses, to see if I could be coaxed into a settlement. My entire extended family was in on it. The betrayal wasn't just my parents and brother. It was the whole damn system. "Thank you for your concern, Aunt Carol," I said, my voice dripping with ice. "But I have a lawyer now. Any future communication can go through her." I hung up before she could respond. The feeling of isolation was immense. It wasn't just me against my parents. It was me against the entire clan. They had closed ranks and I was on the outside. But the lawsuit, as insane as it was, gave me something I didn't have before. A battlefield. They wanted a war? Fine. I would give them one. My meeting with Ms. Chun took place the next day in her sleek, downtown office. The space was minimalist and modern, all glass and steel, much like the woman herself. She was in her 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that I found instantly reassuring. I laid out the whole story, from the overheard conversation to the lawsuit. I left nothing out. She listened intently, her face impassive, occasionally jotting down a note on a legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "Well," she said, her voice crisp, "on the one hand, this is one of the most brazen attempts at familial extortion I've ever seen. On the other hand, they have absolutely no case. It's textbook harassment. So we can get it dismissed?" I asked, a sliver of hope rising in my chest. "Oh, we'll do more than that," she said with a thin smile. "We will make them regret ever filing it. Verbal loan agreements of this nature are notoriously difficult to prove. It's a classic," she said, situation. "The burden of proof is on them, and they have none. No contracts, no emails, no texts confirming these were loans." "I don't want their money," I said quickly. "I don't want to countersue. I just want them gone. Out of my life." "I understand," she said, her eyes softening for a fraction of a second. "The goal here isn't to win money. It's to win peace. But to do that, we need to be prepared. They are going to paint you as a cold, ungrateful son who abandoned his family in their time of need. We need to paint them as what they are, manipulative and predatory." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a more strategic tone. "I want you to document everything. Every phone call, every text, every unsolicited visit. Keep a log. And from now on, I want you to have a dashcam running in your car at all times." "A dashcam?" I asked, confused. "Why?" "It's a CYA measure. Cover your ass. If they try to confront you in a parking lot again, we'll have a record of it. Anything that can establish a timeline or record an interaction is valuable. Think back. Is there anything from that Sunday? Any evidence at all?" I shook my head. "No." I was on the porch. My phone was in my pocket. "There's nothing." The word dashcam stuck in my mind, though. I used to have one in my old car, but I hadn't bothered to install it in my new one. It felt like a loose end, a detail without a purpose. "Don't worry," Ms. Chun said, seeing my frustration. "We don't need a silver bullet. We just need to show a pattern of behavior. Their desperation is their weakness. We'll let them talk. And eventually, they'll hang themselves with their own words." I left her office feeling 100 pounds lighter. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting. I had a plan. I had an ally. The board was set. The pieces were in motion, and I was ready to play the game. The day of the deposition arrived, gray and overcast, a perfect mirror of my mood. We weren't in a courtroom, but a sterile conference room in a high-rise office building. The air was thick with tension. On one side of the long, polished table sat my family. My father, looking stoic and grim. My mother, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, and Greg, whose face was pale and sullen. Next to them sat their lawyer, a slick, overconfident man named Peterson. On my side, there was only me and Ms. Chun. She was a picture of calm, her files arranged neatly in front of her. She gave my hand a reassuring squeeze under the table just before we began. A court reporter sat at the head of the table, her fingers poised over her stenotype machine. The proceedings were being recorded, every word a part of the official record. Peterson began the questioning. His strategy was immediately clear, to paint me as a monstrous, unfeeling son. He started with my childhood, asking my parents leading questions about the sacrifices they'd made for me. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, did you provide Daniel with a loving home? Oh, yes, my mother sniffled. Everything. We gave him everything. Did you help pay for his college education, ensuring he wouldn't be burdened by debt? Of course, my father said, his voice firm. We believed in his future. They went on like this for an hour, constructing a narrative of a perfect, self-sacrificing family and their inexplicably cruel son. They spoke of the loans they had given me, conveniently forgetting they were gifts for graduations and birthdays. They talked about my sudden and shocking emotional withdrawal. Through it all, I remained silent, my expression neutral, just as Ms. Chun had instructed. I could feel their eyes on me, searching for a reaction, for a crack in my composure. I gave them nothing. Then it was my turn to be questioned by Peterson. He leaned forward, his eyes glinting. Mr. Miller, he began, his voice dripping with condescension. You've heard your parents' testimony. They describe a long history of mutual support. And yet, on the evening of October 12th, you ceased all contact. You blocked their numbers. You refused to see them. Can you explain to this room why you would suddenly abandon your family in such a cruel manner? This was the moment, the question I had been waiting for. I took a sip of water, my movements slow and deliberate. I looked directly at my parents and my brother. Their faces were a mixture of smugness and anticipation. They thought they had me trapped. I didn't abandon my family, I said, my voice clear and steady, filling the silent room. I overheard them plotting to systematically steal over $300,000 from me. The air went out of the room. Peterson's smug smile faltered. My mother let out a small gasp. My father's jaw tightened. That's a very serious and unsubstantiated allegation, Peterson said, recovering quickly. What proof do you have? I was on the porch on Sunday, October 12th, I continued, ignoring him and speaking directly to the record. I was bringing a lasagna, and I heard my father, Frank Miller, tell my brother, Greg Miller, not to worry about his legal troubles. I heard him say, and I quote, "We'll make your brother pay for everything." I heard them discuss my salary. I heard them concoct a plan to lie about needing money for a new roof and medical bills to manipulate me into funding my brother's criminal defense. Lies, my father boomed, slamming his hand on the table. He's making it all up. It's his word against theirs, Peterson said with a dismissive wave. A fantasy concocted to justify his own selfish behavior. I glanced at Ms. Chun. She gave me a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. It was time. It's not just my word, I said, my voice dropping but carrying an undeniable weight. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a small, black object, placing it on the polished table with a soft click. It was a simple USB flash drive. What's that? Peterson asked, narrowing his eyes. It's a funny thing about technology, I said, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment. My previous car had a dashcam. When I bought my new one a few months ago, I was lazy. I just tossed the old one in the glove compartment. I never got around to uninstalling the software or reformatting the memory card. It's a high-end model. It doesn't just record video, it records audio. It records everything, even when the car is turned off, if it detects motion or sound nearby. Like, for instance, the sound of a conversation happening 10 feet away on a quiet porch. The blood drained from my father's face. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Greg looked like he was going to be physically sick. They knew I had them. This was the main twist, the reveal I had been holding on to. After my meeting with Ms. Chun, the word dashcam had rattled around in my head. On a whim, I had gone to my garage and dug the old device out of a box of junk from my trade-in. I hadn't expected anything, but there it was, a crystal-clear audio file, time-stamped, of their entire, damning conversation. This flash drive, I said, tapping it with my finger, contains the complete, unedited audio from that evening. Would you like me to play it for the court reporter? I'm sure she'd be happy to transcribe the part about the leaky roof for the official record. Peterson was speechless. His case, built entirely on lies and manufactured sympathy, had just been obliterated by a piece of plastic no bigger than my thumb. Ms. Chun leaned forward. My client has been subjected to a malicious and frivolous lawsuit. He has been harassed and slandered. This evidence is definitive. I advise you to withdraw this suit immediately, unless your clients are prepared for a countersuit for malicious prosecution and defamation, not to mention the potential legal ramifications of what's on that recording. My father stood up so abruptly his chair screeched against the floor. This is over, he growled, not looking at me, but at his lawyer. He then turned and stormed out of the room. My mother, sobbing openly now, scurried after him. Greg was the last to leave, unable to even meet my gaze. But I wasn't finished. There's one more thing, I said, and Peterson, who was hastily gathering his papers, froze. Just so we're all clear, I announced to the room at large. As of last month, all of my liquid assets have been moved to an international bank. And 2 weeks ago, I accepted a director-level position at my company's London office. I'm moving abroad next month. I stood up and looked at Peterson, whose jaw was now hanging open. My family wanted my money, and they wanted control. Now they have neither. Tell them not to contact me again. Ever. This is the moment that changed everything, when I finally took back control of my own life. Thank you for sticking with me to this point. You are amazing. If you could do me a huge favor and like this video and comment the number 1 below, it lets me know you've been on this journey with me. It not only helps more people find this story, but it also tells me that my experiences mean something to someone out there. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of my journey. The lawsuit was withdrawn the very next day. There was no apology, no acknowledgement, just a sterile email from Peterson to Ms. Chun confirming the dismissal. It was a quiet, anticlimactic end to a war that had been anything but. But silence from them didn't mean silence from the world. News, especially bad news, travels fast in a small suburban town. Mrs. Gable, my parents' next-door neighbor and the town's unofficial gossip columnist, had apparently seen my father storm out of the law office building, followed by my weeping mother. It didn't take long for her to piece together a version of the story, a version that, for once, was surprisingly close to the truth. The narrative they had so carefully crafted for decades, the perfect family, the successful sons, the respectable pillars of the community, crumbled to dust. People who had once greeted them warmly at the grocery store now offered only curt nods. Friends they had known for years suddenly stopped returning their calls. Their attempt to weaponize their reputation had backfired spectacularly, leaving them socially isolated in the very community they cared so much about. I watched from a distance, a detached observer of the fallout. I didn't feel joy or satisfaction, just a profound, hollow sadness for the family that could have been. Mark told me that Greg's legal troubles had deepened. Without my financial bailout, he had been forced to take a plea deal. He was sentenced to 18 months in a low-security federal prison for tax fraud and embezzlement. The other problems he had mentioned were now a matter of public record. To cover his legal fees and the restitution he was ordered to pay, my parents had to sell the house. The house I grew up in. The house where I'd overheard the conversation that changed my life. They sold it for less than it was worth, desperate for the cash. They moved down to Florida to live in a small guest room at my Aunt Carol's house. The same Aunt Carol who had tried to play the role of the concerned mediator. I imagined those were some tense family dinners. I never heard from any of them directly, but in a way, the silence was the loudest confession of all. It was an admission of guilt, of shame, of a defeat so total there was nothing left to say. They had gambled everything on the belief that I was weak, that my love was unconditional and exploitable. And when they lost, they were left with nothing but the ashes of the life they had built. The 2 weeks leading up to my move to London were a whirlwind of packing, paperwork, and goodbyes to the life I had known. I sold my furniture, ended my lease, and had a farewell dinner with Mark, who promised to visit me across the pond. Throughout it all, a part of me was waiting, tensed for one final, desperate attempt at contact from my family. Came in the final 48 hours. The first call was from a blocked number. I almost didn't answer, but my gut told me I needed to. It was Greg. His voice was thin and reedy, stripped of all its former arrogance. He was calling from a payphone, he said, during a break from his pre-sentencing preparations. He didn't yell or accuse. He begged. "Danny, please," he whimpered. "They're going to take everything. My house, my wife. Jessica is talking about divorce. Please, there has to be something you can do." I listened to him, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a flicker of the old protective instinct. But it died as quickly as it came. "There's nothing to do, Greg," I said, my voice flat. "This is the consequence of your choices." "But..." "Goodbye, Greg," I said, and I disconnected the call. I immediately blocked the number he had somehow gotten through on. One down. The next day, my mother called from Aunt Carol's phone. Her tears sounded genuine this time, raw with desperation, not performance. She talked about my father's health, about their shame, about how they had nowhere else to go. She asked if I could just find it in my heart to forgive them. "Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting, Mom," I told her, my own voice thick with an old, familiar sorrow. "I hope you find peace, but you can't find it with me. Not anymore." I didn't wait for a reply. "Goodbye, Mom." Click. 2 down. The final call came just hours before I was due to leave for the airport. It was my father. He didn't beg or cry. His voice was laced with a bitter, venomous rage. "So you're really doing it," he spat. "Running away. You destroyed this family, you know that? Your selfishness. I hope you're happy." "I am, actually," I said, and the surprising thing was it was true. A sense of peace was finally settling over me. "I'm not the one who destroyed it, Dad. You all just finally showed me what it was really made of." "You ungrateful." I didn't let him finish. I didn't need to hear it. His anger, his blame, it was all just noise. It had no power over me anymore. "Goodbye, Dad," I said, and for the last time, I hung up on a member of my family. Then I turned off my phone, picked up my suitcase, and walked out the door, ready to start my new life. 1 year later, London was a city of endless gray skies and vibrant, unexpected color. It was a city of history, of reinvention, and it suited me perfectly. The first few months had been a blur of adjusting to a new culture, a new currency, and the relentless pace of a global metropolis. But now, a year on, it felt like home. My apartment in Notting Hill was smaller than my old place, but it had large windows that looked out over a communal garden, and it was mine. My job was challenging and rewarding. Leading the new team, I found a sense of purpose and camaraderie I hadn't realized I was missing. We had just landed a major new client, and the celebratory mood in the office was infectious. Mr. Harrison had been right. A fresh start, an ocean away, was exactly what I needed. I had built a new life from the ground up, a life that was entirely my own. My weekends were filled with exploring museums, finding hidden pubs with my new friends, and taking the train to the countryside for long, soul-cleansing hikes. I had friends, real friends, who knew me for who I was, not for what I could provide. We talked about work, politics, relationships, everything except my family. They knew I had a complicated past, and they respected my silence on the matter. For the first time in my adult life, I felt light. The constant, low-level anxiety that had been my companion for so long had vanished. The sense of obligation, the weight of being old reliable, had been lifted. I no longer dreaded the sound of my phone ringing. I no longer felt a knot of guilt in my stomach for spending money on myself. I had gone through therapy. My therapist helped me unpack decades of emotional conditioning. She helped me see that my core desire wasn't to be a provider, but to be loved and respected for who I was. The money had simply been my tool for trying to buy that love, a currency that was never accepted. She helped me understand that true family isn't about blood. It's about respect, trust, and mutual support. I was learning to date again, to be open and vulnerable with people in a way I never had before. I was still cautious, but I was no longer building walls. My life wasn't perfect, but it was authentic. It was a life built on a foundation of self-respect, not on the shifting sands of my family's needs. The phantom limb of my old family still ached sometimes, usually on quiet Sunday afternoons. A pang of loss for the ideal I once believed in. But it was a clean pain now, a scar that reminded me of a battle I had survived, not an open wound that refused to heal. I was healing. I was happy. I was free. And that was more than I had ever dared to hope for. Just when I thought the past was firmly in the rearview mirror, it found a way to reach me. It arrived on a rainy Tuesday, a thin, airmail envelope with a Florida postmark, tucked in with my bills. My mother's familiar, slightly shaky handwriting was on the front. My first instinct was to throw it away, to not let it disturb the peace I had worked so hard to build. But curiosity, or perhaps a need for final, absolute closure, made me open it. The letter was short, only one page. It wasn't filled with pleas or accusations. It was a confession. Daniel, it began, I don't expect you to reply to this, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. I am writing this for me, to say the things I was too cowardly to say before. I am sorry. I am so deeply, truly sorry. Not just for the plan, but for everything. For all the years we took you for granted. For making you feel like your love was only as good as your wallet. Your brother is where he deserves to be. Took me a long time to accept that. I see now that my love for him was a poison. I enabled him, protected him from consequences, and I helped turn him into the man he became. The next paragraph was what truly stunned me. This was the final, unexpected twist number 3. But I need you to understand something about your father. It wasn't just about the money for him. He was proud of you, Daniel, so proud it hurt him. He saw your success, your independence, the life you built for yourself without his help, and he felt like a failure. He came from a generation where the son was supposed to follow in the father's footsteps, to be a little less successful. You eclipsed him, and his pride couldn't handle it. Taking your money, making you reliant on his approval. It was his broken way of trying to feel powerful again. Of trying to feel like your father, not just the man whose son had outgrown him. It was never about need. It was about envy. I had to read that paragraph 3 times. Envy. Not greed, not desperation, but envy. A father's jealousy of his own son's success. It was a motive so petty and so profoundly sad that it took my breath away. It reframed everything. The dismissive comments about my job, the backhanded compliments, the constant expectation that I should shoulder their burdens. It was all a quiet, desperate attempt to level the playing field, to cut me down to a size he could manage. He didn't want my help, he wanted my deference. He wanted to maintain control over the one asset he thought he would always own, his son. The letter ended simply. We lost everything, but the truth is we had already lost it all long before that day. I hope you are happy. You deserve it. Linda. I folded the letter and sat there for a long time, watching the rain streak down my window pane. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel a desire to reconnect. I felt a strange sense of peace. The final piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. The story wasn't about a good son and a bad family. It was a tragedy, a story of broken people, of pride, and of a love so twisted it had turned into a weapon. My father hadn't been a monster. He had just been a small, insecure man. and understanding that didn't excuse his actions, but it did release me from the burden of his hatred. It was never about me. My success wasn't my sin. It was just the mirror that showed him his own perceived failures. With that knowledge, I was finally completely free. It's Sunday. The sky over London is a familiar, comforting shade of gray. In my small kitchen, the warm, rich scent of garlic, oregano, and simmering tomatoes fills the air. On the counter, cooling, is a perfectly browned lasagna. For a long time after everything happened, I couldn't even look at one. The dish was a symbol of my betrayal, a monument to my own naivete. But now it's something different. It's a reclamation. I make it for myself now and sometimes for my friends. I follow my grandmother's recipe, the same one I used on that fateful night. But the ingredients have changed. I no longer layer it with a sense of obligation or a desperate need for approval. I bake it with self-respect. As I cut a piece for myself, steam rising to fog the window, I think about the man I used to be. The man who believed that love had to be earned, that family was a debt he would spend his life repaying. I don't hate that man. I feel a sort of gentle pity for him. He was doing the best he could with the tools he was given. But I'm glad he's gone. The man I am today knows that love without respect is just debt in disguise. He knows that no is a complete sentence, and that boundaries are not walls to keep others out, but fences to protect the garden you've grown within yourself. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gone to the porch that night. If I had walked in, served the lasagna, and played my part. I would have been drained of my savings. Yes, but I would have lost something far more valuable. My future, my spirit, myself. That night, I lost the family I thought I had. But in doing so, I found the one person I had been neglecting my entire life. Me. You don't owe anyone an apology for saving yourself. It's the most important rescue mission you will ever undertake. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I truly hope it connected with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to make a tough choice to protect your own peace? I'd be honored if you shared your thoughts or your own story in the comments below. And if you'd like to hear more, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Your support means the world.